Scott Frost has been hired again as the UCF football coach. But should that scare the other coaches in the Big 12? This is an emergency Locked On Big 12.
You are Locked On Big 12, your daily podcast on the Big 12 Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, I think everyone has been put on notice. Happy Saturday, everybody. Welcome into Locked On Big 12. I'm Drake Toll from America's #1 Big 12 podcast, Locked On Big 12. Thank you for making this show your first listen every single day. On 3 is confirmed. Scott Frost has been rehired as the head coach at UCF after a successful tenure in 2016 and 2017, then goes to Nebraska, and now he is back. I do not think, if you hit subscribe, I get to keep my job, by the way. I do not think that Scott Frost's tenure at Nebraska should be held against him when we talk about his ability to come back to UCF and win. When he took the job in Orlando, things were bleak. He was replacing a guy who had been there, who got fired mid-season, 0-8. They finished 0-12. They need somebody, anybody, to come clean up this insane mess at a school that already knew what it was like to win. The same school that beat Baylor in the 2014 Fiesta Bowl. Like, they had been there. Hey, could you help come back and fix all of this? Scott Frost, who had not been a Division I FBS coach, head coach, walks in the door, goes from 0-12 to 6-7, gets you to the Cure Bowl. Instant success. Instant success compared to 0-12 for sure. Then going from losing to Maryland in that first year to beating the brakes off of Maryland in 2017 on the road, he showed that this isn't just a successful record from a UCF standpoint because they were in a worse conference in the Big 12. It's not like, Scott Frost, he won, but they weren't in the Big 12. Can he win actual, Power 5 football game? Yes. From beating the absolute snot out of Maryland that season, finishing undefeated, and his team beating Auburn in the Peach Bowl, he proved at UCF and also on that schedule, a game on the road against SMU, a game on the road against Cincinnati, and they played Memphis. Cincinnati, SMU, both now Power 4 teams. Memphis, considered one of the biggest expansion candidates in the country for a major conference when realignment comes back around. He was winning games against good opponents. When the time called, and it was like, hey, Scott, we need you to go beat this really good Power 4 team or any Power 4 team, he would do it. It was done in the Peach Bowl. And you set up the next guy for a Fiesta Bowl appearance the next season. Then at Nebraska, here's where I really start to give Scott Frost an excuse. When he got to Nebraska, this was a situation of a native son had returned. This wasn't, that guy coached our football team for a bit. This was, hey, we have harbored this guy as a player. He's a legend. So much so that the governor of the state named September 1st Scott Frost Day. I don't really know how the process works, but I don't think you can unday something. I think now that September 1st is Scott Frost Day in Nebraska, it's still Scott Frost Day, which is a little bit awkward because they fired the guy. That's the kind of pressure he was walking into of, oh, shoot, they want me to win a national championship. I've only been a head coach and not even at the Power 5 level for 2 years. Now I'm going to pilot Nebraska. I can do this. 4-8, 5-7, 3-5, 3-9, and then fired after 3 games. Just 3 games in that 2022 season. 16-31, 10-26 in Big Ten games. Not very good. His best finish in the Big Ten was his first year when they went 3-6 in conference play. But I do not think that is the Scott Frost. There's a big correlation here to Rich Rodriguez, Rich Rod has been massive in this West Virginia conversation. He's the guy who was a legend there, left, wasn't a legend at Michigan, and now with the opportunity to come back, all you have is a good taste in your mouth from the ability for that guy to work with your university and win. That's what Scott Frost did. He found a niche at UCF that worked. Did he bite off more than he could chew by going to Nebraska? Absolutely, and it fell apart all around him. But all that you know as a UCF fan is a guy who wins. And, by the way, a guy who's a pretty darn good representation of just like human beings. I've never heard anything bad about Scott Frost in the coaching world. And here's further proof of that. He was, again, we can't sugarcoat it, terrible at Nebraska. They gave him 4 complete years. They let him go into year 5 at Nebraska, sucking. He went from 4-8 in year 1 to 3-9 in year 4. And their administration was like, well, shoot. He wasn't a problem. It wasn't like, oh my gosh, got to get this guy out of here. We can't work with him. They did everything they could to hold on to the guy who September 1st was commemorated to. That's a good sign. And now what he did, and he only had 2 years. Here's what's crazy, dog, is Scott Frost didn't have the same transfer portal that we do today. It wasn't like the circus that it is now. He didn't have NIL. He had to walk into 0-12 and be like, okay, this is the roster I pretty much have. I can bring in 1 guy, 2 guys, a few different pieces and try to build, but I'm going to have to win with what I've got. And he goes to UCF where there isn't a lot of pressure because 0-12, you want something. And he won. Yes, to an extent with someone else's players, but I don't think that should hurt you here. He was building and not only building, but successfully winning in the middle of a rebuild. That's really tough to do. So that was the biggest key for me was, hey, we need to hire somebody that has a Florida tie, that knows Florida, that knows UCF. Scott Frost certainly knows UCF. The dude went 13-0 and won a national championship there. And he can recruit Florida. That's the biggest thing this dude's got to do is just recruit Florida. He's going to be there more than 2 years now. He's not going to be poached by somebody big. This is sorry, I'm back. Hey, Bobby Petrino, a wild example for me to use. An insane thing to come out of my mouth, but it will. Louisville starts winning games at Louisville. I think he took him to a Sugar Bowl or something. Starts winning games at Louisville, goes to Atlanta to coach in the NFL, has a really bad, weird hodgepodge of everything that happens in that decade span between first Louisville and second Louisville. What does he do when he comes back to coach the Cardinals? He has a Heisman Trophy winning quarterback. You know, this isn't like, oh no, they brought in the guy who was bad. I mean, is this going to work out? It's happened before. Dudes return. Bill Snyder, these are different. But there are guys who are like Bill Snyder says, you know what, I'm hanging it up, I'm done. And they called and they're like, hey, Bill, things aren't going too hot. Granted, Bill Snyder didn't go coach Nebraska into the absolute ground, but they're like, Bill, things aren't going too hot. Could you come back, please? Comes back, has Heisman Trophy candidate Colin Klein and takes Kansas State to the #1 team in the country. These work. Things like this work. Like if you're a UCF fan, you got to be excited. That guy is back on your sidelines. The guy that brought you back to prominence is on your sidelines. And I think if you're a Big 12 school, this is the first time that Scott Frost will have coached UCF in the Big 12, coached UCF at the Power 4 level. But I do think he reinvigorates a lot of the donors that are still there, a lot of the fans that are still there, a lot of people who saw him win at such a high level already. Check. My stamp of approval as host of Locked On Big 12. To you, Scott Frost. That's cool, man. We're going to see Scott Frost in a UCF hat on the sidelines. That's freaking cool, dude. He's good. That's fun. I like what you've done with this. You got to win, though. This has been, it always will be, Locked On. Thanks for making it your first listen every single day. Dos grande.